AITA. My wife became emotional abusive. Since giving birth, she topped it off by cheating. Now she is begging me to reconsider. But should I? I've been married to my wife for 2 years now, and we've been together for 4. We got married young. I was 28, she was 27, and we had big dreams for our future. A year ago, we had our first baby, and things have never been the same since. Before we had him, everything felt perfect, or at least I thought it was. We had a solid relationship, shared responsibilities, equal respect, the works. But after the birth, everything changed. I don't know what happened, but my wife became a completely different person, and it was like I didn't know her anymore. At first, I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I thought maybe it was just the stress of being a new mom, the exhaustion, the pressure of taking care of a baby. But soon it became clear. It wasn't just stress or exhaustion. She was angry at me for anything and everything. I tried to brush it off, but it kept happening. The smallest things set her off. If I asked if she needed help with the baby, she would snap at me, saying I didn't understand how hard it was. If I made a simple comment about her taking a break, she would accuse me of not caring about her. It was like every time I tried to talk to her, I was walking on eggshells. Nothing I did was good enough. She'd sit there, scrolling through her phone, holding the baby even when he didn't need to be held. She would spend hours on her phone while I did everything else. Working, cleaning, taking care of the house, making sure the baby was fed. But when I asked for a little help, or even just a moment of peace, she'd say, "You have no idea how hard this is." I tried to be supportive. I tried to be the understanding husband. But I couldn't help feeling like I was being pushed aside. I didn't get any affection, not even a hug. We hadn't been intimate in over 1.5 years. At first, I thought it was just the stress of parenthood. But when I brought it up, she made me feel like it was all my fault. She would accuse me of not understanding her needs, of not being sensitive enough to what she was going through. And let me tell you, I was doing everything I could. I was working full-time, doing all the housework, taking care of the baby whenever I could, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. It's hard to explain how soul-crushing it is to try and talk to someone you love, only to be told that you're the problem. I tried to get her to go to therapy, to talk about what was going on. I thought maybe there was something deeper happening, some underlying issue. But every time I brought it up, she would lash out at me. "You don't understand me," she'd say. "You're just trying to fix me." I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. I wanted to help her. I wanted to make it work, but the more I tried, the worse it got. The verbal abuse started getting worse too. She'd call me selfish, insensitive, say I didn't care about her, that I didn't understand what she was going through. I started questioning everything. What happened to the woman I married? Where did she go? I hated the way things were. I hated the way she treated me. But I was scared. Scared of ending the marriage because of our son. Scared of being a single dad. Scared of what people would think if I left, because we had a baby now, and I didn't want to be judged. A small part of me even held on, hoping things would get better, hoping she'd snap out of it and realize how much I was doing for her and for us. But deep down, I knew something had to change, or I was going to snap. It had been a long 14 months since the birth of our son. I had been carrying the weight of this relationship on my shoulders for so long that I was starting to wonder if it was all worth it. The tension was building, and every day felt like a struggle. The emotional strain from her constant criticism, her anger, and her refusal to acknowledge how much I was doing finally started to take its toll on me. I was mentally and emotionally drained, and no matter what I did, it was never enough. It wasn't just the lack of intimacy or the fact that I was doing everything around the house, but it was the constant sense of walking on eggshells. Every day, I was just waiting for the next fight to erupt. I started to think about what life would be like if we weren't together. I thought about how peaceful it would be to not be constantly on edge, to not be her emotional punching bag. I tried to push those thoughts away, though. I didn't want to give up on my family, and I kept thinking that maybe if I just tried a little harder, things would improve. But it was getting harder and harder to ignore the reality. I couldn't keep living like this. There were times when I would see her holding the baby, scrolling through her phone, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of loneliness. It was as if she wasn't even present in the relationship anymore. She was physically there, but emotionally, she was somewhere else. And every time I tried to talk to her about it, to tell her how I was feeling, she'd turn it around on me. She'd say that I was being selfish, or that I didn't understand what she was going through. It felt like no matter how hard I tried, I was always in the wrong. I was always the villain. One night, everything changed. She told me she was going out with some friends to a bar. I didn't think much of it at the time. She'd gone out with her friends before. But when she came back home at 4 a.m. stumbling drunk, I knew something was off. I was tired. I had worked all day and then spent the evening taking care of our son and doing everything around the house. When she came home, she just collapsed into bed, not saying a word to me. I don't know what it was, but something in me snapped. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just frustrated. I felt betrayed. I waited for her to fall asleep, and then I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. Maybe it was my own sense of guilt, or maybe I just wanted the confirmation that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But when I looked through her messages, I found exactly what I was hoping I wouldn't. There, in plain sight, were texts between her and some random guy. They weren't just innocent texts either. They were flirty. The kind of texts that made it clear they had been planning to meet up, to do more than just talk. And then there was the part that sealed it for me. The texts about a hotel room. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She had cheated. She had crossed a line that I couldn't come back from. I wasn't even angry at that point. I felt numb. There was a strange relief that washed over me. I didn't have to keep living like this anymore. The marriage was over, and I didn't have to feel guilty about it. I didn't have to be the one to fix things anymore. I finally had an out, and part of me felt like it was the only way I could truly move on. The first thing I did the next morning was take a DNA test. I know it might sound crazy, but I needed to know for sure that the baby was mine. I wasn't doubting it, but after everything that had happened, I needed the peace of mind. When the results came back, they confirmed what I already knew. The baby was mine. That's when I told her. I didn't give her a chance to say anything. I just told her that I knew about the affair. I told her our marriage was over. I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I was done. And I didn't care about her excuses. She begged for my forgiveness. She cried, tried to blame it on postpartum depression, on past trauma, on alcohol. But none of that mattered to me anymore. The damage was done. The betrayal was too much. She promised to make it up to me, told me she would do anything to fix things, that she didn't want to lose our family. But I wasn't having any of it. I had already mentally checked out. I had already lost hope in this marriage long before the affair. The infidelity was just the nail in the coffin, and there was no coming back from it. The days that followed felt like a blur. There was this weird, tense atmosphere in the house, like we were both pretending that things were normal, when in reality, everything had shattered. I could barely look at her without feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and a deep sense of betrayal. She was constantly apologizing, promising to change, to be better. But none of it mattered. Words meant nothing to me anymore. Her promises felt hollow because she had already shown me who she really was. I had seen the signs before, how she treated me, how she shut me out emotionally, how she became cold and distant. But the affair was the final confirmation that things were beyond repair. It wasn't just about the physical betrayal. It was everything that led up to it. The emotional neglect, the verbal abuse, the way she had made me feel invisible in my own marriage. I had given her everything I could, and in return, I was met with nothing but contempt. She still tried to talk to me every day. She would cry, saying how much she regretted what she'd done, how she never meant to hurt me. She begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance, to think about our son. But it was like a broken record. Every time I heard it, it just made me angrier. How could she say she loved me when she had already betrayed me in the worst way possible? How could she promise to be better when she had shown me time and time again that I was the last thing on her mind? What really hurt was seeing her try so hard to justify everything. She told me that it was all the stress of having a baby, that she was overwhelmed and didn't know how to handle everything. She blamed everything from postpartum depression to alcohol. It was always something else, never her own choices. She tried to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that I was somehow to blame for everything that had gone wrong. But I wasn't the one who had stepped out of the marriage. I wasn't the one who had lied and cheated. I felt conflicted at first. I wanted to be the good guy, to not rip apart our family, to make things work for the sake of our son. I even considered staying for a brief moment. Maybe if I stayed, things could improve. Maybe she could change. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I couldn't be the one to constantly carry the emotional burden while she checked out and did whatever she wanted. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years of neglect, the years of trying and failing to get her to see how much I was hurting. It was about the emotional abuse I'd endured, the constant gaslighting, the way she turned every issue into something about me. I had given so much of myself to this marriage, and in return, I had nothing left. The hardest part of all of this was the fact that we still lived together. It was like we were two strangers trapped in a house, pretending to be a family. I didn't know how to act around her anymore. I didn't know what to say. Every time she came near me, I felt nothing but disgust. It wasn't just the infidelity that had ruined our relationship. It was everything that led up to it. The emotional distance, the resentment, the feeling of being utterly alone even though I was living with someone. She would still beg for my forgiveness, still tell me that she loved me and wanted to fix things. But I had already made up my mind. The marriage was over. There was nothing left for me to fight for. I had given up, and I knew deep down that it was the only way I could save myself. The hardest part was facing the reality that I had to let go. I had to let go of the life I thought I was going to have, the future I had imagined with her. I had to accept that it wasn't just her I was leaving behind. It was everything I had worked so hard for. But at the same time, I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness and my mental health for the sake of something that was never going to work. As days went by, I became more and more resolute in my decision. Every apology she gave felt like a reminder of how much I had already suffered. Each tear she shed seemed to strip away whatever ounce of compassion I had left for her. I had to admit to myself that I was done. There was no going back, no rebuilding what had been broken. The trust had been shattered, and with that, everything else had crumbled too. She kept promising to change, swearing that she would work on herself, that she would go to therapy, that she would be a better partner. But how could I believe that? How could I trust someone who had already broken me? It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that had led up to it. The constant emotional abuse, the coldness, the dismissiveness. She had treated me like I didn't matter, and now she expected me to believe that I was her priority. But I knew deep down that her actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. I found myself thinking about the future, a future without her, a future where I could be free from the constant emotional weight of trying to save a marriage that was never going to work, a future where I could be a better father, where I could focus on building a healthier life for myself and my son. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that staying in this toxic relationship would only hurt all of us in the long run. There were moments, of course, when I felt guilty. I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I wondered if I was being too harsh, too quick to walk away. Maybe if I'd given her more time, maybe if I'd been more patient, things could have gotten better. But those thoughts were fleeting. Every time I considered staying, I remembered the endless nights of feeling alone, the endless arguments where she would blame me for everything. I remembered the emptiness I felt in our relationship, the emotional neglect that I'd endured for so long. I couldn't keep living in this cycle anymore. I had tried to make it work. I had tried everything. I suggested therapy. I tried to be understanding. I tried to be patient. But at some point, you have to stop trying to fix something that isn't meant to be fixed. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together, and in the end, I was the one who had been falling apart. The hardest part was watching her beg me not to leave. It broke me every time I saw the desperation in her eyes. But I knew that staying would only prolong the pain, for both of us. I had already made my decision. The marriage was over, and nothing could change that. She would continue to apologize, continue to promise change. But I had learned the hard way that words meant nothing without action. And I had seen no action. I had seen nothing but the same destructive patterns repeating themselves over and over again. She had betrayed me, emotionally abused me, and abandoned me when I needed her the most. There was no coming back from that. I remember the last conversation we had before I made the final decision. She was crying, pleading with me to reconsider. She told me how much she loved me, how much she regretted everything. But I wasn't moved. I couldn't be. I had already lost all respect for her. She had broken something in me that could never be repaired. And so I told her, as calmly as I could, that I was done. I told her that I had already made up my mind, and there was no going back. I told her that she didn't get to dictate the terms of our marriage anymore, that I couldn't continue to live in a relationship where I was treated like I was invisible, that I couldn't continue to live in a marriage where betrayal and abuse were the norm. I left her there, crying, begging, promising she would change. But I didn't care anymore. I had heard it all before, and I was done listening. I walked away from that conversation knowing that it was the last time I would ever let her have that kind of power over me. The days after that conversation felt surreal. It was like I was living in a fog, just going through the motions. There were moments when I felt numb, as if everything that had happened over the past year and a half was a distant memory. I had made the decision to end the marriage, but that didn't make it any easier to actually face the reality of it. I kept replaying everything in my head: her betrayal, the constant fighting, the emotional abuse. It felt like my mind couldn't escape the weight of it all, no matter how much I tried to push it away. Living under the same roof after I made my decision was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. We were essentially living like strangers, sharing space but not words. She tried to engage with me, tried to talk to me like nothing had happened, but I was stone cold. There was no room for more empty promises, no space for her to convince me to reconsider. I had made my peace with the fact that this was over, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me back into her cycle of emotional turmoil. But it wasn't easy. I was still grieving, in a way. Grieving for the future I had imagined for us, for the family I thought we could be. Grieving for the person I had tried to hold on to for so long, even when she had already given up on me. I had spent so much time trying to fix things, to make everything work, that I hadn't even realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. I had become a shell of the person I used to be, a person who lived for someone else's happiness at the cost of my own. At the same time, I was constantly worried about the effect this was all having on our son. He was still so young, still so innocent. I couldn't help but feel guilty about him growing up in a broken home. But at the same time, I knew that staying in this toxic relationship would only teach him unhealthy patterns. I couldn't let him grow up thinking that this kind of treatment was normal, that it was okay to hurt someone you loved, to use them as an emotional punching bag. So, even though the guilt gnawed at me, I kept reminding myself that leaving was the right choice for both of us in the long run. My wife's begging didn't stop. She would beg me to reconsider every day, sometimes multiple times a day. She would promise that things would be different, that she was willing to do anything to fix things. She tried to guilt-trip me by talking about the baby, saying how unfair it was for him to grow up in a broken home. She even tried to remind me of the good times we had in our early relationship, the days when things were perfect, when we were happy. But those days felt like a lifetime ago, a version of us that no longer existed. I wasn't interested in looking back. I had to look forward, even if it was scary and uncertain. I tried my best to keep my distance emotionally, but I couldn't avoid the moments of weakness. There were times when I felt like I might cave, like I might give in to her pleas and take her back. The guilt would wash over me, and I would question if I was being too harsh, if I was making a mistake. But then I would remember the way she had treated me, how she had emotionally broken me down over time. I remembered how I had tried to fix things, to work things out, but she had refused to acknowledge her part in it all. And that reminded me why I couldn't go back. I also found myself processing the anger. There were so many things I was angry about. I was angry at her for cheating, for not valuing me. I was angry at myself for staying as long as I did, for letting her drag me through this emotional hell. I was angry at the situation, at the way my life had turned out. But even with all that anger, I knew that moving forward was the only way to heal. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what came next. And that meant focusing on my own healing, on becoming a better version of myself, for my son and for my own peace of mind. The tension between us was palpable, and I often found myself retreating to a place in my mind where I could just breathe, away from the emotional warfare that was going on every day. It felt like I was stuck in this limbo, where I was free in my decision to leave, but emotionally still tethered to her. I had to remind myself every day that the best thing I could do for my son, for myself, was to stay firm in my decision and not allow myself to be sucked back into the toxic patterns we had established. As the days went on, the reality of what I'd done began to sink in deeper. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about ending a chapter of my life that had shaped me in ways I never expected. There were moments when I found myself questioning everything, but then I remembered all the reasons why I had made the choice. I had to remind myself that no matter how hard it was, I was doing what was best for me and my son. The emotional abuse had been wearing me down for so long that, in a way, the relief I felt from finally making the decision was overwhelming. My wife's pleas didn't stop, though. She kept apologizing, begging for another chance. She would text me, call me, try to have conversations with me when I was in the same room. Each time, I would shut her down. I made it clear that the decision was final. There was nothing left to salvage, and I wasn't going to put myself through that kind of pain again. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses or promises anymore. Her words had lost all meaning after everything that had happened. I began the process of moving out emotionally, even though we were still living under the same roof for the time being. I started figuring out the logistics of what it would look like to separate for good. The thought of co-parenting was daunting, but I knew I had no other choice. The last thing I wanted was to drag our son into any more of this chaos, so I focused on making sure that, at least when it came to him, I could be a stable presence in his life. I made sure to plan everything for his future, no matter what the rest of my life looked like. Eventually, I took the next step and made arrangements for us to move out and separate for good. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't easy to actually follow through with it. But as soon as I began taking those steps, something inside me clicked. I felt a sense of control returning to my life, a sense of ownership over my future that I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was going to be difficult, and the pain wasn't going to magically disappear, but I was taking my life back. When the day finally came to officially move out, there was no turning back. My wife's face was a mixture of desperation and sadness, but I stayed firm. It wasn't about hatred. It was about self-preservation. It was about teaching myself that I mattered too, that my well-being was just as important as hers. I couldn't continue to sacrifice my happiness and mental health for the sake of a broken marriage. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave, I felt a sense of closure, even if it wasn't what I had imagined when I first got married. I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. It was a chapter where I had the chance to rebuild, to find myself again, and to be a father in a way that was healthy and positive for my son. I had no illusions about what lay ahead, but I knew that I had taken the first step toward a better future. After everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't go back. The damage was done. The trust was broken, and I had already tried to heal it, only to be met with more hurt. I wasn't going to allow myself to be dragged back into that toxic cycle. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. I had finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me again. As I look back on everything that's happened, I know the path I've taken wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It's hard to walk away from someone you once loved, especially when there's a child involved. But sometimes, in order to protect your own well-being and set a positive example for your child, you have to make the toughest decisions. Ending a marriage, especially one that became emotionally toxic, is never simple. There's a lot of hurt, regret, and a long road ahead. But there's also the chance for healing, growth, and a fresh start. For me, this journey wasn't just about leaving a bad situation behind. It was about taking control of my future and my happiness. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure. I'm finally ready to move forward. I'm choosing peace, choosing self-care, and most importantly, choosing to be the best father I can be for my son. To anyone in a similar situation, remember, your mental health and happiness matter. It's okay to walk away from something that's hurting you, no matter how hard it seems. There's always a path forward, and sometimes it's the hardest decisions that lead to the greatest growth. Thank you for listening. If you've been through something similar or have found yourself in a tough spot, don't forget that you're not alone. If you found this video helpful, or if you feel inspired by my journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more content like this. Keep moving forward.